Hello. So, not long ago, universities were considered places where research happens. And then when there was a breakthrough, the IP was licensed for someone else to commercialize it. But not anymore. We'll talk about universities' changing role as startup accelerators on today's Builders Live. So I'm Danya Henninger. I'm editorial director at Technically, which is the news organization with a community of technologists and entrepreneurs. It used to be that academic offices were all about just racking up patents, but these days, universities' role goes way beyond that. They're also helping bring innovation to market. And we're going deep on that topic today with the help of two experts. I have Ben Dibling, who's managing director of the Penn Center for Innovation, which is the University of Pennsylvania's commercialization engine in many ways. And then also Karina Sotnik, who is the founder and CEO of WorldUpstart, which, among other things, runs an accelerator that helps international life sciences and medtech startups enter the US, and also has an impact nonprofit arm that runs programs like Hive Bio. So welcome to Christina. And to Ben. All right, cool. So this first question is probably more for Ben, but I know Christina has thoughts also. Tell me, over the past 20 years, from your role as leading one of these commercialization engines at a university, what has the change been? How has it evolved from mostly just tech transfer to now something much more?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I've been in the business now probably for a little bit over 20 years myself, and I've been at 3 different institutions. And I think, gone are the days when universities, simply, evaluated inventions that came out of the university's research enterprise, and as you said, file patents, and then kind of like license that out and sort of good luck, and we look forward to receiving kind of like a royalty check when you've developed a product. And it's much broader than that now. And I think we certainly take the position that we're really trying to build relationships with the commercial sector. And that's partly what is reflected in the organization of the Penn Center for Innovation, in that we really serve as like a one-stop shop for engagement with industry. And so what we see now is, yes, a company may be interested in some background intellectual property we have, but they're really interested in developing a relationship with the institution and the investigators, and developing those broader relationships, which may involve like collaborative research or sponsored research. And we'll tie into this, I'm sure, through the sort of the conversation, but we try to be very open in terms of what those relationships look like. We really want to see the technology advance towards a new product or service. And in many cases, we're not engaging with an established company. We're helping to support a spin-out company out of the institution to advance the technology. And there really is no one size fits all. We have to be thoughtful and really flexible in terms of how we advance those opportunities. I'll pause there.
Just a quick question there is, what is your top KPI? Like, what are your KPIs? Like, what is it that you're going for?
So I mean, impact, I think I know that's sometimes difficult to quantify, and we acknowledge that, but we really, the vast majority of research that's conducted at Penn is currently funded by the federal government. So that is taxpayers' money. And if there are discoveries and ideas that come out of Penn's research enterprise, I'm a firm believer that the public should benefit from the output of that research. And part of the output of that research is knowledge dissemination, which we do as an academic institution. And part of it is thinking about how can we get those ideas and discoveries on the pathway to becoming new products and services to have impact. And that's obviously very broad in terms of what that can look like. That could be economic impact as well. So, are we able to spin out companies? Are we able to create jobs in the region? Like, how do we lift up the region? So I've hit on a few different things there, but there's no sort of singular thing that I would point to that we always look at, but we're looking to make an impact.
Yeah, and if I can jump in and we work a lot with also international academic institutions that are trying to build commercialization programs. And what I see, I don't know, you guys probably familiar with the triple helix idea, right? Where things really changed in the last 10, 12 years, where we see government now taking role more and more as an investor. We look at BARDA investing into technologies. We see industry becoming more of an educational place, opening up universities. And we see academia, universities as a place to start companies, to really start ventures. And I think this is a big shift worldwide. But what we see happening, a lot of times they want to open a center for innovation or innovation district. And the first thing they do is build a building, and then it sits empty. And it's because they did not do the fundamental work that Penn does so well. And that starts with the culture of disclosure. You invented something, you disclose it, you protect it, right? So I remember when Penn actually went all in educating their faculty and researchers on the importance of that. Before you go and publish or go to conferences, protect, right? And then incentives. I think actually Penn is doing a really good job, but so many other institutions are lacking it, is, researchers are still right now being incentivized to just publish. But what about patents? What about intellectual property? Creating a separate path, maybe to tenure or to other promotions through entrepreneurship becomes equally important. And I think that's where the biggest shift is changing right now in academia. And I agree with Ben, there's no one size fit all, but venture creation becomes a really big and important part of commercialization these days.
And so what are the ingredients, like what are the critical ingredients that a university-based accelerator or venture, like what do universities offer that other accelerators and venture studios don't? And what makes them an attractive place for, especially Karina, for international startups wanting to enter the US?
Well, in my view, if I can jump in, the biggest, the most important role university programs can do, and Penn has the program PCI Ventures that does it really well, is finding an experienced CEO for the researcher or the founder. The founders are amazing scientists. They invent something, but they lack the understanding of the market. They lack the understanding of how to fundraise. Investors will not invest into science projects. They will invest into teams. They've done it before, right? They will invest into milestones. So marrying the two is really important. And we see great results with that works. So I think that's one of the biggest, to me, roles the universities can play. And yes, introduction to industry, obviously, the first funding in, but creating those educational programs, I-Core serves a great role there, just showing how complex the commercialization process is so that the researchers become a little more open to the idea of, another partner in the marriage, right? Finding that CEO, building that board of advisors.
Yeah, and Ben, you had mentioned that it's it's not just spin outs that the Penn Center for Innovation does this for. So it's some of those things that Karina mentioned, some of those strengths of the university affiliation apply for other startups and maybe even corporations that are outside the university.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with Karina that there is a sort of an increased focus in terms of supporting, startup company formation. I think particularly outside of, it happens in all technology sectors. I think it's probably even more important in kind of physical sciences, engineering, AI, computer sciences, startups becoming, I think, are critical. Life sciences, it's a bit of a mix. And so we do develop relationships with existing companies. We do have some unique capabilities here at Penn in terms of clinical expertise that we obviously have to advance assets pretty far along, even within our institution. Penn Medicine really is an incredible engine in terms of like bringing early sort of stage technologies through, whether that's technologies developed at the institution or doing the early stage clinical work for external entities as well. So again, this is all about sort of relationships and not being wedded to any single sort of pathway. We can explore like multiple in parallel, if that makes sense.
For sure. And I think there's probably several case studies that come out of Penn that we could use as an example here, and several have been widely publicized. Like the mRNA technology that helped with the COVID vaccines. I think, Ben, though, you had another idea of. Can you give us an example?
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to. So I mean, I always, we've very fortunate at Penn in terms of success. So I always hesitate to kind of exemplify, one, it feels like I'm leaving others out, but I mean, it would be amiss to not mention the partnership that Penn entered into, with Novartis, back in 2012, around, CAR T, it's this cell therapy, for the treatment of, acute lymphoblastic leukemia and other cancer types as well. And that relationship with, Novartis that we entered into, shortly after some of the early clinical data was published, and it led to this robust alliance type relationship with Novartis, where clearly we brought, as Penn, expertise to the table in cell therapy. This is Carl June and many others who had that expertise that did not exist in the commercial sector, and brought that to the table. And through that partnership with Novartis, the first FDA approval was 2017. And so we can view that as a huge success in terms of that timeframe. For those that aren't familiar with drug development, that is incredibly quick to bring a technology to market that ultimately is, curative for a subset of patients. I mean, these are individuals who had basically, failed every other therapy and they're cured through CAR T. So, being at Penn's a really exciting place, right? Because we're at the leading edge of those types of technologies. And you alluded to mRNA again, Penn, the home of the modified mRNA. And I think the impact that has had has been, truly tremendous.
Yeah, talk about impact for sure. Karina, what is an example that you have seen of someone going through from the university incubation to success?
Well, I just want to say to complement what Ben said, another great example here just recently is in Interior's bio, right? That was just purchased, and that went through the different route. That went through the route of company formation, and then did this incredible spin out and was just bought by Kite. So there's no one way, as Ben said. It's a multi-pronged approach to really get the best innovation into the market. And sometimes it goes in parallel. And sometimes you see which one will take off faster, the venture creation or the partnership with industry. And Penn has many examples, but we have other institutions in the area, and through our Hive Bio, we see technologies coming out of Jefferson and out of Temple that are also started ventures that are now growing through company formation.
Can I just add one thing on that? Because I think Karina hit on something really interesting, which is this whole sort of like not being wedded to a particular engagement. And yes, CAR T, we partnered with Novartis. Karina mentioned Interius. Capstan is another one in this kind of space. And these opportunities were like super exciting technology, right? But really, really cutting edge and too early for pharma to be interested in picking it up. And so the only way really to advance the technology was to form a spin-out company and develop the technology to a stage which Interius and Capstan both did, where they were then had proven the technology enough for big pharma. Interius, it was obviously Gilead, Capstan, it was AbbVie, to come in and kind of pick up the technology. And that's a great outcome, right? Because we were moving the technology along, and now it's in the hands of an entity that actually has very deep pockets, or entities with deep pockets, that is really necessary to do like effective, not just development, but to bring the product to market and commercialize it.
Yeah, and that's all about de-risking, right? And that's de-risking takes different path. And sometimes industry pushes back and says it's too early, it's too risky. So then starting company, bringing that experienced CEO, building that board that can guide it to the right exit is the pathway.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right. So it's not always direct partnership for the IP, even in conjunction. Sometimes it is a startup that will scale to an exit.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. So what are there still, it's evolved a long way, and obviously universities are playing a huge role across the country and probably across the world. What are the bottlenecks that still exist? What are the pain points? If you could change any one thing at university policy, Karina, that you work with, or Ben, if you could, hire any team that you wanted, or expand any team that you wanted, what would you change?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think there's always opportunities to do things differently, and to improve, on the way in which we operate. And universities are all different, right, in terms of how they kind of think and what they do and what they can actually sort of deploy. I do think though that there are opportunities for universities to think about doing more proof of concept type work in-house. We go the sort of the startup route, but even that can be challenging sometimes to raise capital, even if, to Karina's point, when you have the right team, it's all about the team. It's not just the technology, and you have the right group of founders, getting the technology to a stage where it's sufficiently de-risked. And sometimes you can do that in a startup, but I think there's an opportunity for the universities to make sort of proof of concept type investments in early stage technologies. I think particularly in the engineering and sort of hard tech AI sector, that's actually not a huge amount of capital to do that type of work. Life sciences drug development is expensive. So universities need to be very thoughtful about where they deploy that capital. And we are a university, we're an academic institution. So in terms of deploying that capital, you need to be engaged with the commercial sector and the investor community to make sure you're doing the right experiment to answer that next key question. This is not just a research project. It's like you're thinking about like sort of product development. And so many institutions do that. It's a space that, Penn is thinking about very carefully as well. So that is one thing. And then I look as well with some envy at academic institutions that kind of have, a venture fund that kind of sits outside of the institution. And Penn has the Penn Medicine co-investment program, but it's a little bit different. And so these are type of things that I think have the potential to move the needle. And my last thought is just on the talent piece, and I think that is critical for startup company formation and getting the right business talent in. And that's something that we're constantly thinking about, and understand that there's a bit of a gap there. And I think some of it is regional, in all honesty, in terms of, Philadelphia is an amazing city. I love it here. But we're not the same as Cambridge, in the Boston area, or San Francisco in the Bay Area. So we have to think about how do we bring that talent to Philly? How do we retain them, make them understand that there's a pipeline of opportunities here, and if something doesn't work out after a year of funding, there's a company down the road for them to go in and serve a role. So these are some of the things that I kind of think about, and each institution needs to think differently in terms of what their capabilities, what their strengths are, and where their gaps are, because they're not all the same.
I actually agree with Ben that the proof of concept programs are hugely important, and play a really big role. There used to be a QED program, for example, run by a science center that was multi-institutional, that did a really important, this first money in role into important technology. So having either based on one institution or multi-institutional is very important. And the ingredients there are the same. You surround young technology with mentors, with people from the industry, with taking them on a journey how to de-risk this really early concept. So I think that is very important. I want to actually introduce a sort of a, I think, not a straightforward idea, and maybe a little controversial, but I've been sitting and brewing on this idea for a long time, and I want to ask your opinion, both of you. So academic institutions are great at research, great at teaching. They create enormous amount of professionals that go into the world that are facing problems that they think they can fix, and then they have no support in doing it. And I'm always thinking, wouldn't it be great to have an alumni entrepreneurship support program? Because then institutions, instead of just always going to them for money, to alumni, can offer something back and rein in those relationships, but also help spin out more interesting companies. So this is just an idea I'm thinking about, but I think universities would be a great place to do that. And again, this is like more for engineering, for AI. You know, you're not going to do drug discovery that way, but in other places, I think that can play a great role.
Yeah, I think so. I know that there are informal alumni entrepreneurship networks, but you're suggesting perhaps something more formal, which would something that actually has funding capital there. Interesting. Is that something, Ben, that Penn has thought about?
Yeah, no, it's definitely. I mean, I think we're we're very thoughtful, very Penn has a very broad like alumni community, and incredibly successful, and that is something that we think about a lot, which is how do we leverage those individuals that want to give back, and to Karina's point, not just in terms of dollars, but but expertise and guidance. And so I do think there's a huge opportunity there. It's philanthropy is a really important component of what supports Penn's research enterprise. Can the alumni give back more broadly than that? And they do, and absolutely. But can we come up with more structured relationships to enable that, and just to sort of reduce the barrier to engagement? Yes, I think it's a great idea.
All right. So last note, 5 years, let's think into the future a little bit. 5 years from now, something that you hope will have seen, something that has happened as universities' role as accelerators, or the relationship between startups and accelerators, someone on the cutting edge of these kinds of relationships, or some kind of new relationship. I mean, I don't know if the way AI integration is working its way into all fields will change how these university engines, innovation engines work. But 5 years from now, what will you point to and say, I didn't expect that, or I'm so thrilled that this happened? Something that you're waiting for. I mean, maybe, Karina, it's this alumni network.
Maybe it's alumni network. I was, maybe Ben remembers many moons ago, I built an accelerator at Penn for mobile apps, because at that time it was all the rage. Doing something like that for AI would be amazing, right? Because AI does cut across all sorts of industries. And so having sort of a AI fusion program could be really interesting. I'm just thinking out loud.
Yeah, I mean, you can't ignore like the potential impact that AI is already happening in terms of how investigators are thinking about their research. I think we're obviously already seeing AI-enabled technologies. Think people talking about building like large language models based off of the huge amount of data that academic institutions have, and I think these have huge potential to really shape people's lives. So it's a really exciting time, and I think candidly we're also thinking about it in terms of just how we run our businesses, right? And how do we streamline things through utilizing AI to as as a tool, right? Not as a substitute for what we do, but how do we make ourselves more efficient? How do we enable the talented people on the team to focus their time on the things where they can really add value and take off some of sort of the administrative stuff. So I think that's just inevitably gonna not just our industry, right? It's across the board. But I think it's going to be dramatic.
Terrific.
Agreed.
An AI fusion studio. I love it. All right. Well, Ben, Karina, it's been terrific having you on Builders Live. Thank you so much for joining us. See you soon.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much for having us. Thank you, Ben.